The air inside courtroom 304 of the Manhattan Civil Courthouse carried the stale scent of floor wax and old paper. It was the smell of endings. But for Kendrick Malone, the atmosphere reeked of victory. Kendrick adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit and leaned back in his leather chair at the plaintiff's table. He checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that cost more than the average American's yearly salary, and exhaled sharply through his nose. "She's late," Kendrick whispered to the man beside him. Or maybe she finally realized it's cheaper to just give up. Beside him sat Garrison Ford. Garrison wasn't just a lawyer. He was a weapon. Senior partner at Ford, Whitmore and Associates, known in New York legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway. He didn't just win divorce cases. He incinerated the opposition until nothing remained but ash and a favorable settlement. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's keep breathing life into stories that deserve to be heard. Now, let's continue. Garrison smoothed his silver tie, his eyes scanning the docket with predatory boredom. "It doesn't matter if she shows, Kendrick. We filed the emergency motion to freeze the joint assets on Monday. She has no access to liquidity. No retainer means no representation. No representation against me means she walks away with whatever scraps we decide to toss her." Kendrick smirked, looking across the aisle. Sitting there alone was Imani. She looked smaller than Kendrick remembered. She wore a simple charcoal grey dress she'd owned for years. Her hands were folded neatly on the scarred oak table, fingers interlaced so tightly her knuckles had gone white. No stacks of files, no paralegals whispering strategy, just Imani staring straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. "Look at her," Kendrick chuckled loud enough for the spectators to hear. "Pathetic. I almost feel bad. It's like watching a deer waiting for a semi-truck." "Focus," Garrison warned, though a small smile played on his lips. "Judge Henderson is a stickler for decorum. Let's get this done quickly. I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin at 1. Don't worry, Garrison. By 1 o'clock, I'll be a free man, and she'll be looking for a studio apartment in Queens." The bailiff bellowed out, "All rise. The Honorable Judge Lawrence P. Henderson presiding." Judge Henderson swept in, black robes billowing. He was a man of sharp angles and short patience, known for clearing his docket with ruthless efficiency. He took his seat, adjusted his spectacles, and peered down at the parties. "Be seated." He opened the file. "Case number 24, NIV 0091, Malone versus Malone. We are here for the preliminary hearing regarding the division of assets and the petition for spousal support." The judge turned to the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Ford, good to see you again." "And you, Your Honor," Garrison said, standing smoothly. "We are ready to proceed." Judge Henderson's gaze shifted to the defense table. He frowned. "Mrs. Malone, I see you are alone. Are you expecting counsel?" Imani stood slowly. Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. "I am, Your Honor. She should be here any minute." Deshawn let out a loud theatrical scoff. Judge Henderson's eyes darted to him. "Is there something amusing, Mr. Malone?" Garrison stood immediately, placing a restraining hand on Kendrick's shoulder. "Apologies, Your Honor. My client is simply frustrated. This process has been dragged out, and the strain is significant." "Keep your client's frustration silent, Mr. Ford," the judge warned. He turned back to Imani. "Mrs. Malone, court began 5 minutes ago. You know the rules. If your attorney is not present—" "She's coming," Imani insisted, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. "There was traffic." "Traffic?" Kendrick muttered, leaning forward so his voice carried across the aisle. "Or maybe the check bounced, Imani." "Oh, wait. You can't write a check. I cancelled the cards this morning." The judge's gavel came down hard. "Mr. Malone, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." "My apologies, Your Honor," Kendrick said, standing and buttoning his jacket, feigning humility. "I just want to be fair here. My wife is clearly confused. She doesn't understand the complexity of the law. She has no income, no resources. I offered her a generous settlement last week, $50,000 and the 2018 Lexus. She refused." Kendrick turned to look at Imani, his eyes cold and hollow. "I tried to help you, Imani, but you insisted on playing games. Now look at you, sitting there with nothing. You don't have a lawyer because nobody wants a charity case." "Mr. Ford, control your client," Judge Henderson snapped. "Your Honor," Garrison interjected smoothly, "while my client's passion is regrettable, his point is valid. We are wasting the court's time. Mrs. Malone clearly has not secured representation. Under the precedent of Vargas versus State, we move to proceed immediately with a default judgment on the asset division. She has had months to prepare." Judge Henderson looked at Imani. He looked tired. "Mrs. Malone, Mr. Ford is technically correct. The court's time is valuable. If you cannot produce an attorney right now, I have to assume you are representing yourself pro se, and given the complexity of the forensic accounting involved in your husband's estate, that would be ill-advised." "I am not representing myself," Imani said, her eyes fixed on the double mahogany doors at the back of the room. "Please, just 2 more minutes." "She's stalling," Kendrick hissed. "She's got nobody. Her father was a mechanic, and her friends are all suburban housewives. Who is she going to call? Ghostbusters?" Kendrick laughed again, a cruel barking sound. He felt invincible. He looked at Imani, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, and saw only an obstacle he was about to crush. He wanted to humiliate her. He wanted her to know that leaving him was the biggest mistake of her life. "Your Honor," Garrison pressed, sensing the kill. "I move to strike her request for a continuance. Let's end this charade." Judge Henderson sighed. He picked up his gavel. "Mrs. Malone, I'm sorry, we cannot wait any longer. We will proceed with—" The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the frames. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Everyone turned. Kendrick spun around in his chair, annoyed at the interruption. Garrison Ford frowned, his pen hovering over his notepad. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Standing in the doorway was not a frazzled public defender. It was not a cheap strip mall lawyer. Standing there was a woman who looked exactly like Imani, the same deep brown skin, the same high cheekbones, the same full lips and piercing dark eyes. But where Imani looked broken and small, this woman radiated power. She wore a tailored white suit that cost more than Kendrick's entire wardrobe. Her locks were pulled back into a sleek, professional updo. She wore dark sunglasses, which she slowly removed, revealing eyes that had stared down senators and CEOs. Behind her walked 3 junior associates, all carrying thick leather briefcases, moving in a V formation like fighter jets escorting a bomber. The woman didn't rush. She walked down the center aisle, the click of her heels sounding like a metronome counting down Kendrick's remaining time on Earth. Garrison Ford dropped his pen. His mouth fell open. His face, usually a mask of arrogance, went pale. "No," Garrison whispered. "That's impossible." "Who is that?" Kendrick asked, confused by his lawyer's reaction. He squinted at the woman approaching. "Wait, she looks just like... Is that Imani's sister? She told me her sister was dead. She told me she was an only child." The woman reached the defense table. She didn't look at Imani. She didn't look at the judge. She turned slowly and looked directly at Kendrick Malone. She smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile a shark gives before it drags a seal into the depths. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice smooth, cultured, and projecting to every corner of the room. "I had to file a few motions with the federal court regarding your finances, Mr. Malone. It took longer than expected to list all your offshore accounts." Kendrick froze. Judge Henderson leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Counselor, state your name for the record." The woman placed a gold-embossed business card on the stenographer's desk. She turned to the judge. "Zuri Okafor," she said. "Senior, managing partner at Okafor, Crown and Sterling of Washington, D.C. I am entering my appearance as counsel for the defendant." She paused, then looked at Kendrick again. "I am also her twin sister." The silence that followed Zuri Okafor's introduction was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a bomb blast. Kendrick blinked, his brain trying to process the information. "Twin sister?" he stammered, looking from the imposing woman in white to his trembling wife. "Imani, you said you were an only child. You said your sister died at birth." Imani finally looked up, her eyes wet but her chin high. "I said she was gone from my life, Kendrick. I didn't say she was dead. We were estranged. Until yesterday." "Estranged," Zuri repeated, the word rolling off her tongue like a verdict. She moved around the defense table, taking the chair beside Imani. She didn't hug her sister. Not yet. This was business. She placed a heavy briefcase on the table and snapped the latches open. "Imani left home 20 years ago to escape the pressure of my world. She wanted a simple life. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not the Okafor name." Zuri turned her gaze to Garrison Ford. The opposing lawyer was currently trying to make himself look smaller in his chair. "Hello, Garrison," Zuri said pleasantly. "I haven't seen you since the Meridian Tech merger litigation in 2015. You were barely an associate then, weren't you? Fetching coffee for the real lawyers." Garrison cleared his throat, his face flushing deep red. "Ms. Okafor, it's an honor. I didn't know you were admitted to the bar in New York." "I'm admitted to the bar in New York, California, D.C., and before the International Court of Justice in The Hague," she replied without breaking eye contact. "I generally handle constitutional law and multi-billion-dollar corporate mergers. But when my twin sister called me weeping, telling me that a mid-level marketing executive with a Napoleon complex was bullying her," Zuri paused, letting the insult land, "I decided to make an exception." "Objection!" Kendrick yelled, standing up. Panic was starting to set in. "Personal attack. Who does she think she is?" "Sit down, Mr. Malone," Judge Henderson barked. The judge looked at Zuri with a mix of reverence and fear. Everyone in the legal world knew the name Zuri Okafor. She was known as the Iron Gavel. She had argued 14 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and won 12. She was a myth. "Ms. Okafor," Judge Henderson said, his tone respectful, "while your reputation precedes you, we are in the middle of a hearing regarding asset division. Mr. Ford has filed a motion for default judgment." "Yes, I saw that motion," Zuri said, pulling a file from her briefcase. "It was cute. Sloppy, but cute." She stood and walked toward the bench, handing a thick stack of documents to the bailiff to give to the judge. She dropped a duplicate stack onto Garrison Ford's desk with a heavy thud. "Mr. Ford claims my client has no assets and no representation. That is now moot. Furthermore, Mr. Malone claims that the assets in question, the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the house in the Hamptons, and the portfolio at Goldman Sachs, are his sole property, protected by a prenuptial agreement signed 7 years ago. That prenup is ironclad," Kendrick shouted. "She gets nothing. She signed it." Zuri turned to Kendrick. She removed her glasses. "Mr. Malone, Do you know who wrote the standard template for the spousal coercion clause used in the state of New York? Kendrick blinked. What? I did, Zuri said softly. In 1998, I drafted the legislation that defines exactly what constitutes coercion when signing a marital contract. She tapped the document on Garrison's table. And according to the sworn affidavit my sister provided this morning, you threatened to cancel her health insurance and cut off her access to her sick grandmother's nursing home funds if she didn't sign that paper the night before the wedding. The courtroom gasped. That's a lie, Kendrick screamed, his face turning purple. She's a liar! We also have the text messages from that night, Zuri continued, her voice rising just enough to cut through his shouting. Recovered from the cloud server you thought you wiped. Exhibit C, Your Honor. Judge Henderson flipped to Exhibit C. His eyebrows shot up. Garrison Ford was flipping through the pages frantically. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Your Honor, we haven't had time to review this evidence. This is an ambush. An ambush? Zuri laughed. It was a terrifying sound. Mr. Ford, you tried to default judgment a woman with no lawyer while your client mocked her to her face. You don't get to complain about fairness. She straightened her jacket. Now, let's talk about the finances. Zuri turned back to the gallery, addressing the room as if she were lecturing a class of law students. Mr. Malone claims his net worth is roughly $8 million, a respectable sum for a man of his limited talents. Kendrick looked like he was about to have a stroke. However, Zuri said, pulling out a second, thicker binder, my team of forensic accountants, who, by the way, usually track terrorist financing for the Pentagon, spent the last 12 hours tracing the intricate web of shell companies Mr. Malone set up in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. She dropped the second binder. Thud. It appears, Your Honor, that Mr. Malone has been funneling marital assets into a holding company called Apex Ventures for 5 years. The total amount hidden is not $8 million. Zuri leaned in close to Kendrick, her face inches from his. It's $24 million. And since you failed to disclose it on your financial affidavit, signed under penalty of perjury this morning, she smiled at the judge, that constitutes felony fraud. Kendrick slumped back into his chair. He looked at Garrison. Do something, he hissed. Garrison Ford looked at the documents. He looked at the judge, who was glaring at Kendrick with burning intensity. Then he looked at Zuri Okafor, who was checking her manicured nails. I need a recess, Garrison croaked. Request denied, Judge Henderson said instantly. I want to hear more about these Cayman accounts. Ms. Okafor, please proceed. Zuri smoothed her skirt. Thank you, Your Honor. But before we get to the fraud, I'd like to address the matter of the mockery my client endured regarding her lack of a lawyer. She walked back to Imani and placed a hand on her shoulder. For the first time, Imani looked up at her sister and smiled. A genuine, hopeful smile. Kendrick, Zuri said, her voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate tone. You mocked my sister because you thought she was weak. You thought that, because she is kind, she is defenseless. You mistook her silence for surrender. Zuri turned to the court reporter. Let the record show, she stated clearly, that Imani Malone is now represented by Zuri Okafor, and I am not here to negotiate a settlement, Mr. Ford. She looked at Kendrick, her eyes flashing with cold, hard light. I am here to take everything, the house, the cars, the hidden money, the reputation. I am going to peel your life apart layer by layer until you are left with exactly what you tried to leave my sister with. Nothing. Mr. Ford, Zuri said, gesturing to the podium. Your witness. The courtroom air had shifted. It was no longer stale. It was electric. The few spectators in the back, mostly bored law clerks and retirees, were now leaning forward, phones out, texting friends that something major was happening in courtroom 304. Judge Henderson rubbed his temples. Mr. Ford, do you wish to cross-examine? Well, I suppose there is no witness yet. Ms. Okafor, you have the floor. Thank you, Your Honor. I call Kendrick Malone to the stand as a hostile witness. Kendrick froze. He looked at Garrison Ford. Do I have to? You're the plaintiff, you idiot, Garrison whispered harshly, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Get up there, and for the love of God, don't lie. She knows everything. Kendrick walked to the witness stand. His legs felt heavy. He sat down, and the bailiff swore him in. He looked out at the court, trying to regain composure. He was Kendrick Malone. He was a successful businessman. He was the man who made deals. This woman was just bluffing. Zuri walked to the podium. She didn't bring any papers. She just rested, her hands on the wood, and looked at him. Mr. Malone, she began, her voice deceptively light. Let's talk about the traffic you mentioned earlier. The traffic that supposedly delayed my sister's counsel. Kendrick scoffed nervously. It was a figure of speech. She's always late. She's disorganized. Disorganized? Zuri repeated. Is that why you handled all the finances in the marriage? Because Imani was too disorganized to understand numbers? Exactly, Kendrick said, gaining confidence. Imani is a dreamer. She paints. She volunteers at the animal shelter. She doesn't understand ROI or equity positions. I did everything to protect our future. To protect your future? Zuri nodded. Is that why you purchased a condo in Miami on March 14th of this year? The one listed under Malone Holdings, LLC? Kendrick blinked. That was an investment property for the portfolio. Strange, Zuri said. Because according to the credit card statements associated with that property. Statements you tried to shred, but which your assistant, poor overworked Ms. Higgins, forgot to delete from the digital recycling bin. You bought furniture for a nursery. Imani gasped in the gallery. Her hand flew to her mouth. Kendrick turned pale. It was staging for resale value. Staging. Zuri stepped closer. And the diamond tennis bracelet purchased from Tiffany's on 5th Avenue 3 days later, was that for staging too? Or was that for the woman living in the condo? Objection. Garrison Ford stood, though he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Relevance, Your Honor. New York is a no-fault divorce state. Infidelity doesn't impact the division of assets. It does when marital funds were used to facilitate it, Judge Henderson ruled, his eyes narrowing at Kendrick. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Malone. Kendrick gripped the railing of the witness box. I don't know what she's talking about. Zuri smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had tasted blood. You don't? Okay, let's move on from the mistress for a moment. We'll circle back to Nisha later. Kendrick flinched at the name. Let's talk about your company, Apex Ventures, Zuri continued. You swore in your affidavit that your income last year was $400,000. That's correct, Kendrick said quickly. The market was down. The market was down, Zuri mocked. She turned to the empty jury box, then back to the judge. Your Honor, I have here bank records from the First National Bank of Cyprus. They show a wire transfer of $2 million entering an account controlled by Apex Ventures on the exact same day Mr. Malone claimed the market was down. She held up a piece of paper. And here is the withdrawal slip. Mr. Malone, can you tell the court what you used that $2 million for? Kendrick stayed silent. His throat was dry. I'll help you, Zuri said. You bought cryptocurrency, specifically an untraceable coin that you stored on a cold storage hard drive. A hard drive that is currently sitting in a safety deposit box at the Grand Central branch of Chase Bank, box number 404. Kendrick's jaw dropped. How? How did you? I'm Zuri Okafor, she said simply. Finding money is what I do. Now here is the problem, Kendrick. You didn't declare that $2 million. You didn't declare the crypto. And you certainly didn't share it with your wife. Zuri leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room. You mocked my sister for not having a lawyer. You thought she was stupid, but the only stupid thing in this room, Kendrick, is thinking you could steal $2 million, hide it in a box, and then parade your girlfriend around Miami while my sister clipped coupons to buy groceries. I didn't steal it, Kendrick shouted, cracking under pressure. It's my money. I earned it. She just sat at home painting stupid pictures. She didn't contribute anything. Why should she get half of my genius? The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Henderson looked at Kendrick with pure disgust. Mr. Malone, did you just admit on the record that the money exists and that you intentionally hid it to prevent your wife from receiving her equitable share? Kendrick looked at the judge, then at Garrison. Garrison had his face buried in his hands. Kendrick stammered. No further questions for this witness, Zuri said, turning her back on him. She walked back to the table and sat beside Imani. Imani was crying silently. Zuri reached out and took her sister's hand, squeezing it tight. It's okay, Zuri whispered. He's done. Garrison Ford was a man who prided himself on survival. He had navigated the treacherous waters of New York high society divorces for 20 years. He knew when to fight, when to settle, and most importantly, when to cut a rope to save his own neck. As Kendrick stumbled down from the witness stand, looking like a man who had just gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer, Garrison was already doing the mental calculus. Kendrick had just admitted to perjury and fraud in open court. The judge was furious. And sitting across the aisle was Zuri Okafor, a woman who had the power to not only win this case, but file ethics complaints that could strip Garrison of his license. Garrison, Kendrick hissed as he collapsed into his chair. Fix this. Do something. Object to the hard drive evidence. Say it was obtained illegally. Garrison didn't look at his client. He began packing his briefcase. What are you doing? Kendrick asked, panic rising in his voice. Garrison stood. He buttoned his jacket. Your Honor, Garrison said, his voice steady. At this time I must respectfully move to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff, Mr. Malone. Kendrick's eyes bulged. What? You can't quit. I paid you a $50,000 retainer. Mr. Malone, Judge Henderson said, peering over his spectacles. We are in the middle of a hearing. This is highly irregular. Your Honor, Garrison continued, choosing his words carefully. An ethical conflict has arisen that makes it impossible for me to continue representing this client. As an officer of the court, I cannot suborn perjury. Based on the testimony my client just gave, my continued representation would compromise my professional obligations. Translation. He lied. He got caught. And I'm not going down with him. You coward! Kendrick screamed. He lunged at Garrison, grabbing the lawyer's lapel. I pay you. You work for me. Bailiff! Judge Henderson shouted. Officer Kowalski moved with surprising speed for a big man. He grabbed Kendrick by the back of his expensive suit and slammed him back into his chair. Sit down and shut up, or you're going to a holding cell, Kowalski growled. Kendrick sat, breathing heavily, his tie askew. He looked around the room. He was alone, truly alone. Judge Henderson looked at Garrison. Mr. Ford, I am not granting your withdrawal at this moment. You will sit there and ensure your client's rights are protected until this hearing concludes. After that, you can file whatever motions you want, but you are not leaving this courtroom. Garrison's face fell, but he nodded. Yes, Your Honor. He sat down, moving his chair a distinct 2 feet away from Kendrick. Zuri watched this display with cool detachment. She stood again. Your Honor, since Mr. Malone's counsel is still present, albeit reluctantly, I would like to call my next witness. This witness goes to the issue of character, specifically regarding Mr. Malone's petition for spousal support, which he had the audacity to file against my sister. Call your witness, the judge said. I call Nisha Coleman. Kendrick's head snapped up. No, he whispered. She wouldn't. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened again. A young woman walked in. She was stunningly beautiful, wearing a modest navy dress. She looked terrified. She walked past Kendrick without looking at him. Kendrick reached out his hand. Nisha, baby, don't. She flinched away from him as if he were radioactive. Nisha took the stand. She was sworn in. Miss Coleman, Zuri said gently. Thank you for coming. I know this is difficult. Can you tell the court your relationship to the plaintiff, Kendrick Malone? Nisha took a shaky breath. I was his girlfriend for the last 2 years. Was? Zuri asked. Yes, Nisha said, her voice gaining strength. I broke up with him this morning. Why did you break up with him this morning, Miss Coleman? Nisha looked at Kendrick. Her eyes were filled with tears but also with anger. Because Ms. Okafor showed me the text messages Kendrick sent to his other girlfriend, the one in Chicago. The courtroom erupted. Order, Judge. Henderson banged the gavel. Order. Kendrick looked like he was going to be sick. Ms. Coleman, Zuri continued, unfazed by the noise. Did Mr. Malone ever discuss his wife Imani with you? All the time, Nisha said. He told me she was crazy. He said she was a burden. He said... She paused, looking at Imani with pity. He said he was going to destroy her in court. He bragged about it. He said he was going to leave her with nothing, just for the sport of it. He called it taking out the trash. Imani covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. He told me, Nisha continued, her voice rising, that he had a lawyer who was a killer, and that Imani was too stupid to fight back. He said he was going to make her homeless, so she would have to come crawling back to him, begging for help. He said he wanted to own her. Zuri let the words hang in the air. They were ugly, cruel, and they were the final nail in Kendrick's coffin. Thank you, Miss Coleman, Zuri said softly. No further questions. Zuri turned to Garrison Ford. Cross-examination? Garrison looked at Kendrick, who was staring at the table, defeated. He looked at the judge. No questions, Your Honor. Judge Henderson took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. He didn't look at the papers in front of him. He looked at Kendrick Malone. Mr. Malone, the judge began, his voice dangerously low. In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen some truly despicable behavior. I have seen people fight over dogs, over silverware, over children, but I have rarely seen a display of arrogance and malice quite like this. Kendrick didn't look up. You came into my courtroom and mocked the judicial process. You mocked your wife. You attempted to weaponize this court to abuse a woman you swore to protect. You committed perjury. You committed fraud. The judge turned to Imani. Mrs. Malone, I owe you an apology. The court should have protected you sooner. Imani nodded, wiping her eyes. Zuri put an arm around her. However, Judge Henderson said, putting his glasses back on, I am now in a position to rectify that. He picked up his pen. I am issuing a temporary ruling immediately. The final judgment will follow once Miss Okafor's team completes a full forensic audit of Mr. Malone's assets. Every single penny. Kendrick groaned. First, the judge ruled, I am freezing all assets belonging to Kendrick Malone, Apex Ventures, and any other entity he controls. Access is granted solely to Mrs. Malone and her counsel. Second, I am awarding Mrs. Malone immediate exclusive use and occupancy of the marital residence on Fifth Avenue and the Hamptons property. Mr. Malone, you have 2 hours to vacate. You may take your clothes and personal hygiene items. That is it. If you remove a single piece of furniture, a single painting, or a single light bulb, I will have you arrested. Third, the judge said, looking at Garrison Ford. Mr. Ford, I am referring the transcript of today's hearing to the District Attorney's Office for potential charges regarding perjury and wire fraud against your client. I suggest you cooperate fully if you wish to keep your license. Yes, Your Honor, Garrison said quickly. Finally, the judge said, looking at Zuri. Ms. Okafor, regarding legal fees. Zuri smiled. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Malone will pay 100% of Mrs. Malone's legal fees. Given your standard hourly rate, I imagine that will be substantial. Very substantial, Your Honor, Zuri agreed. Court is adjourned. Judge Henderson banged the gavel. As the room cleared, Kendrick sat there stunned. His life was over. In 2 hours he had gone from a multi-millionaire playboy to a potential felon with nowhere to sleep. He looked up to see Zuri and Imani packing their things. Imani looked different. She stood straighter. The weight was gone. Kendrick stood, his legs shaky. He walked over to them. Imani, he rasped. Imani, please. You can't do this. Where am I going to go? Imani looked at him. She didn't look angry anymore. She just looked done. Before she could answer, Zuri stepped between them. She towered over Kendrick, even though they were the same height. Her presence was a physical wall. Mr. Malone, Zuri said, her voice ice-cold. My sister doesn't speak to criminals. If you have anything to say, you can say it to my junior associate. She pointed to one of the young lawyers behind her, a sharp-looking man named Darian. Darian, give Mr. Malone your card. Darian handed Kendrick a card. Now, Zuri said, taking Imani's arm. Get out of my way. We have a celebratory lunch to get to. I believe my sister has some painting to catch up on. 20 years of catching up, actually. They walked past him. Imani didn't look back. 3 months later, the gallery in Chelsea was packed. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. The lighting was perfect, illuminating the large, vibrant canvases hanging on the white walls. The exhibition was titled Rebirth. Imani stood in the center of the room wearing a stunning red dress. She held a glass of sparkling water, laughing with a group of art collectors fighting over the price of her centerpiece painting, titled The Gavel, which depicted a stylized courtroom scene with a figure of light breaking through chains of darkness. From the corner, Zuri watched with pride, sipping a martini. She checked her phone. A news alert. Disgraced executive Kendrick Malone sentenced to 5 years for wire fraud and embezzlement. She swiped it away. Zuri walked over to her sister. You have a red dot on every painting. You're sold out. I can't believe it, Imani said, her eyes shining. Zuri, thank you. For everything. If you hadn't walked through those doors, you would have found your way eventually, Zuri said. You're stronger than you think, Imani. You survived him for 5 years. I just helped you finish the fight. The sisters embraced. Kendrick Malone learned the hard way that silence isn't weakness. It's just a pause before the reload. He thought he could strip Imani of her dignity just because he controlled the bank accounts, but he underestimated the unstoppable force of a twin sister's love mixed with a top-tier legal degree. Imani didn't just win her freedom, she reclaimed her voice, her art, and her life, leaving Kendrick with nothing but a prison jumpsuit and a lifetime of regret. If you enjoyed this story of karma, justice, and the ultimate courtroom takedown, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the underdog can win. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you mock. You never know who's about to walk through that door.